So I'm glad to see so many of you sticking around for the panel discussion. It should be interesting. Our moderator tonight is going to be David Bordwell from the University of Wisconsin. David, can you come out? And we have another newcomer to Ebertfest this evening, Janet Pearson, who's the director of the South by Southwest Film Festival. And she's flown up from Austin, and she's here to talk about this film as well. Janet, welcome. And we have Michael Phillips, whom you all know from the Chicago Tribune, and Ali Erikin, one of our far-flung correspondents from Turkey. And I'll give David the microphone so he can talk.
Thank you, Nate. We're not going to try to keep it terribly late, but we know that you probably want to hear some things and say some things, so we'll get right into it. I did ask our guests backstage to start by saying something a little bit about what the film meant to them, what attracted them to it, or maybe what they didn't like about it, or just something about their relationship to this film, which has now become such a classic. So, Janet, you want to start?
Well, sure. I'm here kind of as a fan of this film, and it's been threaded in my life as a film goer and a film working in the film business. I first saw it in, I guess, '79. I was just out of art school in San Francisco trying to figure out how to get a job at Zoetrope, and I take the bus every day past Coppola's house and thinking, that blue house, how do I be part of this? What do I do? And I remember, thinking the film was a knockout, and I've seen this version several times, Lincoln Center at the New York premiere, and then I lived in Fiji with my family for a year, and we showed films, and it was this kind of crazy adventure, a little bit more Mosquito Coast than Colonel Kurtz, but it was kind of a crazy thing that my husband, who's a lifelong kind of film champion, had been a mission we were on. And we showed this there, and there's a documentary about it, and this movie figures into that conversation. So, and it was just, seeing it again tonight, what I was struck by, I love it, the ambition, the beauty, but I'd never heard it until your introduction. I hadn't ever heard it as clearly in terms of the richness of the tapestry of the sound. It just, it was always this visual splendor and amaze, suspense, and it sort of turned me onto the Doors, but hearing the fullness of the sound tonight, it was a new dimension, which was really
It's a great
exciting.
theater to hear it in,
yeah,
too.
It was great.
My God, you have to have more than one relationship with this picture because it exists in more than one form, and you see it at more than one point in your life if you're old enough. I mean, I forget the exact order of this, but you're talking about really an overwhelming experience that came out after coming home, after The Deer Hunter, films that really were worth debating and wrestling with in many ways, and this one by far most of all. I find not so much this Redux version, which I frankly think is inferior to the original cut, but even with the vexations of this longer version, I find the first 2/3 of it, the bulk of it, as good as we've seen in 50 years. And I think my intense frustration with much of the last 40 minutes remains.
For reasons we'll talk about this.
I think the I think the one thing that I find fascinating about the film is how it is the culmination of everything that Coppola promised and showed as his genius in his previous films, and definitely his best film, and definitely the best film of his generation as well. That came out from that, from the movie Brats kind of thing. And I don't particularly believe that it is a war picture. I think it actually shows Coppola as a quintessentially American director which is not something that one actually thinks about when you think of Coppola. You don't think about national identity. But if you look at the different films that he's made, from Rain People to Conversation, and even Feelings Rainbow and The Godfather, you see certain facets of Americana that he's actually studied. And in this one, he's studying war and entertainment. And I think that is why it's because of those two very immediate things. And the film is called Apocalypse Now, not just Apocalypse, Apocalypse Now. Because of the immediacy of it, I think it shows the true talent of Coppola and the movie brats.
It's interesting you say that, because to tie it to Michael's point, I do remember at the time people were saying that in a way everybody had stolen a march on him in terms of making a political statement about the war. His film was announced quite early, around 75, 76, and had been planned to be made even earlier, I think, with Lucas directing it. But because it took so long, all these other Vietnam films came out and had rather precise political criticisms of the war. And in a way, people felt, well, what else was there left to do? And Coppola kept making the film and making the film. And finally, I think what I was struck by at the time, and even more tonight, seeing it with this magnificent, in this magnificent theater with the sound, is the way in which when Michael Herr talked about Vietnam, he said it was the first rock and roll war. And that really runs through the whole movie, I think. There's this hallucinogenic quality to much of the film, the sense that there's this kind of delirium about the movie that's reinforced, of course, by the rock on the soundtrack, but also the colored lights and the hazy smoke of different colors. Really, you don't associate these kind of brilliant saturated colors, I think, with a war film traditionally. And yet it seems like some sort of colossal light show, almost. Sound and light show. And this seems to me something that's interesting in the late 70s. I was talking about this with Janet, where many directors of this generation tended to think about cinema as this kind of overwhelming spectacle, borrowing, I think, to some degree from the emergence of rock concerts and light shows. If you think of the climactic battle in Star Wars, or particularly, I think, Spielberg's Close Encounters, these aren't directors who seem to have a very intimate relation with rock and roll in their personal lives, but they seem to have picked up this idea of modernizing spectacle, taking what Cecil B. DeMille used to give us, or what the Hollywood studios used to give us, and somehow giving it a new edge with this kind of druggy, rock-oriented light show or hallucinatory vision. And that was what particularly struck me tonight, seeing it again.